Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the Great Exhibition Road Festival. It is a delight to be here in person with you. And also, we've got about hundreds, possibly thousands of people tuning in online as well. So hello to you at home as well. We are going to try to be as inclusive of everybody as possible. So I'm going to say there will be moments where you can ask questions. It'll be very evident when that is. If you're here with us in the studio here at Imperial College, you can put your hand up. If you're at home with your cats, with your pets as well, simply just drop it in at any point and I will get the question through and I'll be able to ask it of our two wonderful guests who I'll introduce in just a minute. I've got some housekeeping to get through. If you're from different households, please keep about 1 meter apart. When we ask you to leave, please do so promptly and sanitize your hands. While we're talking, if it is okay to, please do keep your masks on. And now let me tell you a little bit about the Great Exhibition Road Festival and why we're so excited to have you here, because this is sort of the return of the festival. It runs all along Exhibition Road, where you've got places like the Natural History Museum, the Victoria and Albert Museum, which I am from, and so we'll be talking a little bit about that, I think, today. Also, here we are in Imperial College, right next to us, the Science Museum, the Goethe Institute, and further up, we just had some people talking to us in the previous talk from the Royal College of Music as well. So it's this beautiful hub of creativity, but it's always been, ever since it was sort of set up, the Albertopolis, Prince Albert was involved in the setting up of this area. It's always been about that conjunction between art and science as well. And I think today we're very much going to get a sense of that as well. So it is going to be a really fascinating look at how art and science can come together to creatively come up with sort of those solutions that we have, the big problems that we have in the world today. And so now if I can introduce our two speakers, starting off, of course, with Hannah Gibson, and then I've got here as well with Jinju as well. But Hannah, if you'd like to introduce yourself very quickly, please.
So my name's Hannah Gibson, and I'm a glass artist with a background in geology, and I specialise in casting with predominantly recycled glass.
Hi everyone, my name is Jinju, and I'm a mixed media textile artist, and I also work with found and thrown away objects, but also personal objects, and upcycling and repurposing them into new materials and art.
Fantastic. And I should probably introduce myself as well. So I'm Dan Bowe, and I've already told you I'm over at the V&A Museum. I'm usually a museum educator, so it's a delight to have you here today. Now, we're going to have a couple of presentations from our wonderful artists here, and then we're going to go into Q&A and a bit of facilitated discussion as well. So who's going first? Is it going to be you, Hannah?
Okay, thank you. Right, so as I mentioned, my name's Hannah Gibson. I'm a glass artist and a geologist focusing on recycling. So I'm going to give you hopefully a little bit of a background of my recent body of work, Recycling Narratives, Whispering Sweet Nothings. So I grew up in North Wales, like you can see on the left, and so with the sea in front and Snowdonia behind, it was hard not to develop a passion for geology and geomorphology. So I went on to study geology at the University of Edinburgh. Just after I graduated, I took my first course in glass at Edinburgh Stained Glass House. In 2015, I returned to university to study at the University of the Creative Arts in Farnham, returning later as artist in residence. During my time at UCA, my focus was on experimentation. So to be able to interweave glass and geology for me was alchemy. During the course, I began working on this body of work, Recycling Narratives, Whispering Sweet Nothings. So each of the cast glass figures became called a sweet nothing, the collective noun, a whispering of sweet nothings. So by keeping the shape the same, an easily identifiable androgynous figure, I focused on the material itself. So my focus is on casting with various types of recycled glass, increasingly challenging types of glass, and trying to push the boundaries of the material and trying to keep my practice more sustainable. So over the last 6 years, I've been building this growing collection of sweet nothings made from other artists' recycled glass that they would otherwise be disposing of. And so the idea is that it's kept together and exhibited together. It's a way of bringing the world of glass closer together. So each of these figures is 27 centimeters tall and weighs around 3.1 kilograms. So on the top here we have David Ariki, Max Jacquard, and Colin Reid. They're all eminent glass casters within the UK, and they all have work at the V&A, literally just around the corner. On the bottom, Louis Thompson, Bruce Marks, James Devereux, Catherine Husky, just to name a few. So along the bottom there, amazing glass blowers working within the UK. So this is glass that they could otherwise not blow again. It's problematic to try and cast, but it shows, you know, the variation in the colours and the shapes and the patterns. So we've got more figures here. So Adam Aronson, second one in is Elliot Walker, who recently won Blown Away, a Netflix series. Catherine Schilling, Ian Chadwick, Opal Seabrook, Laura Hart, Robin Bussell, Joanna Lloyd, and Laura Donofer. So you can see the personality comes through in each piece, and this is glass that would otherwise be disposed of. So alongside working on material, I work on scale. So they range in size from 3.5 centimeters tall or small, all the way through to 41 centimeters tall and weighing about around 9.1 kilograms. So for me, my inspiration lies purely with the glass itself. And so my work's about materiality, and I did think about showing you pictures of landfill sites and, you know, overflowing glass recycling bins. But we've all seen these, and I wanted to try and show solutions and not problems, and positive ways we can move forwards. So I work with predominantly recycled glass and upcycled objects, and with a background in geology, I can interweave so I can look at the chemical composition of the various types of glass. So these figures here are called Through the Looking Glass, and they're made from 100% recycled Bang & Olufsen television glass screens. So you can see on the front left, there's an iron inclusion, so it's just a faint whisper of a previous life. These figures here are Time and Tide Wait for No Man, and they're made from recycled milk bottles with upcycled watch parts. So it's challenging to work with recycled milk bottles to then add watch parts, create several new challenges. They contain elements of brass, bronze, silver, and copper. So each has its own different coefficients of thermal expansion, which is problematic. It's a challenge, but I enjoy a challenge. So this figure here is called Casting Call. So it's made from recycled milk bottles and upcycled textiles. So it's a project, an ongoing project I've been working on for a number of years now. So when I'm making the figures, I start off making a 3.5 centimeter tall test piece. So the case on the left, it's Chanel No. 5 perfume bottles and Marmite jars. So each piece has its own narrative. Here we have the figures made from recycled Bombay sapphire bottles, so it retains that beautiful turquoise blue coloration. On the left, Neal's Yard Remedy bottles, and the figure on the right is made from recycled mobile telephones, touch screens. So these figures here are a shattered past and made from 100% recycled car windscreen glass. So you can still see the cubic shape of the toughened glass pieces, so that the cubes melt enough to hold together and still have that memory of a past purpose. So it is important to me to be able to show that recycled glass can be polished to the same level as you would do glass that you would purchase. So you can see the high polish at the bottom left and at the top right. So the figures on the left are made from, called A Tangible Hope, are made from recycled COVID-19 bottles. So these small, robust glass bottles were so important in the fight with COVID over the last 18 months. And on the right, the figures are made from recycled insulin vials, which is more poignant because insulin was discovered 100 years ago this year. So by choosing a shape that unites, I hope to open a dialogue about sustainability in the recycling process. And I say that the figures are found in pairs, whispering sweet nothings to one another. So what are they whispering? And as Dr. Zeus quite rightly said, that unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing will get better, it's not. So thank you very much for that, Rujin.
That was so inspiring. It's my first time really listening to Hannah talking as well. We've never met before, so that was really inspiring. I'll start introducing my work as well. I'm Jinju. I am a mixed media textile artist, and I also call myself a material storyteller. And I hope through this presentation, I can explain why I call myself a material storyteller. So I've recently graduated from Royal College of Art studying mixed media textiles. And I think the best way to present to you guys about my practice, the best way would be to talk through you guys through my recent project, which was titled Men and Material Gap. And where the idea of this project rooted from is the word human in East Asian culture. So the word for human in Chinese and Korean and in Japanese, the character ren means men, and jian means gap. And in our understanding, the idea of human isn't just one man, but the relationship and the space and the gap we have with one another that really makes us human. And what I wanted to do was to stretch this idea of the space and the gap and the relationship, not just between men, but between us and materials, and to explore what sort of relationship and kind of space we are creating with these materials so that we could start developing a more mindful and lasting and respectful relationship. So this piece is titled I Dream of You. And to kind of talk more about my practice and my idea, I am also very much inspired by East Asian kind of folk culture, tradition, and philosophy. And in our traditional understanding, there is the belief that any objects you own for a long period of time will eventually acquire a soul or a spirit of its own. And it will become like a living like character and a living being that could sometimes play pranks on you and do like evil tricks, but also could do good for you if they feel right. And they are really like a human-like being. And I wanted to bring this idea back, and inspired by this, kind of start creating imageries that provokes people to think, what if they do have a feeling? And what if they are like a human-like being? Would we treat them the same way? So this piece is kind of stretching on that idea. It's a socks that I've owned for 4 or 5 years. It had multiple holes on it, and then I really started to feel like if I throw this away, it has served me for such a long years, and then to throw it away because it cannot be used anymore would be injustice. And so that's why I embroidered myself onto it, and if it were to be thrown away, it would miss me and it will think of me as well. So that's where this piece comes from. This piece is titled, When a Tiger Dies, It Leaves Behind Its Skin. When a Man Dies, He Leaves Behind Its Name. It's also another Korean traditional proverb. And I kind of borrowed this proverb to ask the question of what sort of legacy are we leaving behind? And what does these like piles of valuable material waste that it's piled up in landfill or dumped into ocean, what if our future generation was to rediscover it, what does it say about us as a generation? And what sort of stories do we want to leave behind? And how do we want to be remembered? And how do we want to start changing this narrative? Yeah, I think common thread is a lot about narrative and storytelling that we want to bring on to this conversation here today. This piece is titled 10 Symbols of Longevity. So it's a traditional symbol as well, where it's comprised of deer, crane, pine tree, river, sun, and different elements. And it's been traditionally used, painted, carved, or embroidered onto a person's object to wish for the owner's long and prosperous life. And I wanted to put this back onto an IKEA bag, which kind of symbolizes the fast-paced, disposable, affordable material culture. And by putting it back on there, kind of wishing for the material's long and prosperous life as well, but also at the same time, what sort of material are valued and put into a museum and cherished, and what sort of material do we throw away and consider as waste? And it's the hierarchy of how we perceive material that I wanted to question. Yeah, it's working. This is the last work out of my project I wanted to show. So it's an animation piece. And because my work is, because through my work I do try to animate and anthropomorphize materials, I think animation is a great way to kind of convey that message. And because I want to talk about material value and culture and sustainability, but I want to do it in a fun and approachable and humorous and relatable way that isn't scary and heavy. Because often when we think of sustainability or circular material culture, it's daunting and it's hard to perceive, but then I want to kind of change the narrative and make it more accessible for everyone. Yeah. This is just to show a bit more of the process of how I make my work. So I'm very much inspired by what I see and what I find. And in order to get to where I want and to create what I want to make, I start with drawings a lot. And drawing allows me to assess like the possibility of, and feasibility of making a work before I embark on any of the actual making. This video, I just wanted to quickly show how I actually make, and I think it helps people to understand what sort of process it is that I go through and how much time it actually takes to make any of these pieces. And I think it's especially talking about craft, the amount of time invested into each of the work is an important aspect as well, because when you talk about material culture, today it's very fast and disposable, but then we're slowing it down and we're reappreciating, and it's an important aspect to consider. Yeah. Oh, no. Last one, this is the last slide, and I just wanted to show a bit more about where this current project rooted from. And this is a project that I did about 4 years ago. It's called Making Plastic Precious Again. And it's a similar idea of kind of revaluing and changing the narrative of plastic. Plastic itself is an extraordinary and it has so many amazing qualities to it, and yet we don't appreciate its full qualities, and it's trying to change that. And all these plastics are found from UK beaches, from like Margate, Brighton, and I've collected them all, and I've turned them into body accessories in order to just challenge what is valuable material and what is not. Yeah, that's
Fantastic.
it.
Well, can we just very quick give both of our artists a round of applause for their fantastic presentation. And again, welcome to everybody joining us, family and friends as well, and also everybody joining at home. If you've got any questions at home, please do drop them in. I'll be able to pass them on to our artists as well. But I wanted to start by just talking about this idea that we're talking about crafty science. And so we're talking about materials, and we're talking about how art and science can come together. Do you want to tell me a little bit about how science comes into your practice as well? What are some of the things that scientifically that you've had to engage with in order to be able to do the work that you do? So shall we go Hannah first, and then we'll come across to you, Woo-Jin.
So for myself, so if I was to be using conventional glass to cast with, I would purchase it from abroad, and it comes with a well-documented firing schedule, so I can look at it and I know what temperature I anneal at, what temperature at strain point. So it's all beautifully laid out, and I know exactly how to cast, whereas with recycled glass, it's completely unpredictable. So if, for example, you have a Bombay Sapphire bottle, you've got no idea what to do. So it might mean that I contact the company that made the glass bottle. The glass could potentially be analysed underneath the mass spectrometer. But essentially it involves experimentation, a bit more experimentation and more experimentation. So it's analysing, it's quite rigorous analysis of the glass, because we don't want it to, in 5 years, 10 years time, break. So I have to take from a geological background, I have to take quite a rigorous approach and look at the chemistry of the glass that I'm going to be using.
You mentioned some of the challenges that you have to address when you're working on your work. I mean, what are some of them, and what's the worst that can happen when you're experimenting with your glass? So, not mentioning any names, so I used a glass bottle, a turquoise glass bottle, maybe 5 years ago, when a gin company was starting out, and I cast with their bottle, and it was absolutely beautiful, and it cast really nicely. And so the back of my head, I thought, well, that's fine, because in the future I know that firing schedule is just fine. I put it back in the kiln. I tried another mold a couple of years later. The same didn't happen, and without going into too much details, there was flames involved, all different types of things. And what had happened essentially was that they changed supplies of their bottles, and they'd put new enameling on the side of the bottles, which was highly flammable at low temperatures. So that didn't particularly go very well. So when you're using it, the firing schedule for one bottle might not be necessarily the same for the other one. So it's problematic. It's very, very challenging. I think one of the things that at museums, at the Science Museum right next door, they're currently decanting their archives, for example. And one of the mottos that they've got at the Science Museum is, the objects are always trying to kill you. So I think you've got to be very careful about everything that you're working with. But is that the case with textiles? I think it's a little bit less likely that they're going to explode and combust, right?
I think Hannah probably has more authority to talk about craft and science in this context, because personally I work with materials, and I probably lack knowledge in the scientific area. But I think what I do try to do more on my personal level is to understand the material quality itself, and the fibers, and if they are natural or synthetic. And I think with textile, it's like you said, working anything with post-consumer item, the hardest part is that you never know what's in them, really. It's hard to know, whereas if you use a raw material, oh, this is made out of this, and it's very straightforward. And I think that's probably also a big challenge in future sustainability of scaling up this recycling, because in small scale it's possible, but then how do we actually scale this up and make a bigger change? Yeah.
I mean, the other thing with your work as well is I feel that it sort of blurs the boundary between what is a textile, a fashion textile object, and then sculpture in a way as well. And you alluded to the idea of how long it took you to make something. I mean, how long does something like this sort of take to pull together, weave together? What's the right way to call your process?
Embroidered together. I think this one actually took maybe 2 weeks. This one was faster. For instance, like the tiger, because we went into lockdown when I was making this project. I had to use like a slower domestic machine that I had on my own to finish the work, and it took probably like 3-4 months to finish because it was way slower. Yeah, it takes a while.
And I do love that idea, though. I think with both of you, there's the question of what we leave behind. And I wondered if we can kind of maybe have a chat. This is the first time you've met. You're both working materials with, I think, a similar sort of idea of trying to keep this idea of sustainability, environmentalism, there's recycling involved. But what's your response to each other's work? Because I think before we came in, there was an idea that you might already start to think about how you might collaborate together.
Absolutely.
Do you want to go first?
I back in 2015, when I started working on this project, and I spoke to Max Jacquard, who has work at the V&A, and he spoke to me about the work that I was doing, and essentially he said what was a legacy that I wanted to leave behind. And I thought at the time about what was a legacy, because they say, take only photographs and leave only footprints. And what I want to do is try and encourage the next generation of artists and craft practitioners and collectors and people who are, I want to try and inspire people to go to museums, to art galleries. And, I could do that by using recycled glass in my practice, trying to be as sustainable as possible, but having that narrative within the work itself. So when people picked up the figures and people looked at the figures, they would question about what was the origin of the glass. If the glass wasn't used in such a way, what would happen to the glass? So to take, for example, mobile telephones. So our relationship with touch screens, with glass, has never been as close as it is today. So we look at touch screens, and if we're honest, some people, we touch those phone screens all day, every day. And the component that, they, in 2 years, they go from being Gollum's My Precious to landfill. The components behind have an extrinsic value, but the glass itself, what happens to the actual glass? So I want people to constantly question about, what's the origin of things, and, what's that narrative that we can take forward? And that's exactly what you're doing, is, it's the narrative, and how can we, what's happened in the past and what can happen in the future. And it's so it's very, very, very important to me to be able to show that.
And I think when we met online before this talk, when Hannah talked about especially about the phone screen and how everything else in the phone can be recycled, but then the phone screen itself, it's the most intimate part of the phone, and yet it's the most visible. I think that was kind of like shocking to me as well, in a way. I've never really thought about it. And I think even if I work with a certain material, I know really nothing about any other materials, and there's so much to learn when you have this kind of opportunity to talk with another artist working with a certain materials. And I think when Hannah especially talked about the iPhone screen, I think it kind of really clicked with me as well, because textiles, I especially like using textiles because it's the most intimate material as well with you. You wear it every day, from the moment you're born to the day you die. You are wrapped in textiles, and you can never be free of textiles anywhere you go. And it's constantly rubbing against you, and yet it's, at the same time, it's also the most disposable material today, along with like plastic and everything. And I think it kind of click with me. It's like this idea of intimacy and disposable, and what's one moment so much intimate can suddenly be like neglected. I think, I would love to like work with you in the future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the point, isn't it? That sense of intimacy, and you couldn't get more intimate than the fingerprints that you leave behind on the glass on that screen. I wanted to ask you just about maybe the object that you've just mentioned at the V&A Museum. If you could tell us a little bit more about that, Hannah, and then sort of draw out that idea of the narrative, because for me, sort of a Lego figure is one of those sort of creations in which, as a young child, you kind of pick up and then you play with the Lego piece and it becomes almost anything you want it to be. And so it's great to have artists sort of interpret it as well. So how does the artist's fingerprint sort of get put into the object? And do you kind of agree with what Ruijin was sort of saying about, you know, this idea of the soul being embedded in the artwork as well?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And so when I started off doing the project, I wanted to try and find a figure that sort of drew people in and brought joy. And initially, that was my hope. I've given talks in primary schools and secondary schools, universities, adult education classes, and I was desperate to try and find a shape that would spark joy initially, and then people would question. It would open a dialogue about the recycling process. And one of the things I started to do was quite early on, in my MA, we were doing exhibitions and various art galleries, but having worked in a school, and I remember myself being 4 and being dissuaded from using a glass cup, and I was given a plastic cup. I was told to be careful from glass marbles and things like this. So I wanted to create something that people could look at and touch and hold and question. So for me, I chose that figure. And then so what I do is people will give me glass. A local school provides Marmite jars from the school breakfast club, and I turn those Marmite jars into small sweetener things that the school hides around for people to find and keep. And I continue doing that project, which I've been doing for 6 years now, of making these 9-centimeter tall figures, and I leave them out for people to find and keep. And on is a note, so a lot like Paddington Bear, and it says the origin of the glass, and it gives my email. So people find these figures, so there might be, I don't know, in a library, in a museum, out and about. So White Cliffs of Dover. So an example is someone found a figure at the White Cliffs of Dover not that long ago, and she wrote an email with a photograph, and she put the figure in the back of a car between 2 boxer dogs. And another lady found a figure, and she took it to the cinema with her to watch Ghostbusters. And another gentleman takes his to do the crossword with a coffee each morning, and people have taken the figures and then left them out for people to find and keep. Other people have gone on to do courses. So some people have gone to Adam Aronson's glassblowing studios or London Glassblowing, but it questions, you know, where does the glass come from? And if whoever it is picks up that figure and questions, you know, the origin of the glass, and they sit and think, well, what, you know, I've got this empty glass bottle in my hands. Do I put it in the recycling bin, or do I put it in the general waste? If they just start thinking about that, irrelevant to what age you are, you know, then hopefully I've done something productive.
Who put a glass jar in the recycling this week? That's almost every home group that we've got out there. So yeah, I mean, I'd personally love to request a Vegemite one, but I think that's, you know,
I know, that's Vegemite ones.
You know, Marmite versus Vegemite. But I think this question, we've got a question from Hannah, so thank you very much for putting it through, Hannah. I think this actually could apply to both of you, which is just to do with the idea of you've got a Lego piece, you were talking about Marmite, I'm talking about Vegemite, and then we're also talking about IKEA bags, and we're talking about, you know, brands. You know, do you both actually speak to the company? Do you deal with them as collaborations? Are they in support of your work? How does that relationship work? Let's go Ruijin first this time.
Actually, I didn't have any opportunities now to collaborate, but I am definitely open to collaborate. And when I was in RCA, when I was still studying, we've been given a bunch of materials that are from IKEA, actually, that are no longer sellable or that are not popular, that they wanted to kind of donate to art schools so that it's given a new life. And I think there are many opportunities like that. That's called dead stock, where it's already produced, but no one wants it, and it always goes to landfill, or it's a kind of whatever from ASOS, or like if you buy a cloth and if you return it, it usually goes to landfill, or it's burned, or it's thrown away. It's never resold because it's cheaper today to get rid of these items rather than trying to resell them. And it's, yeah, I would love to work with kind of brands as well and see where we can actually make some impact.
And I'm just going to quickly say, that was a question from Liz, actually. So it was from Liz. So thank you very much, Liz. But also, I've got a question from Amy, which I just want to follow up with Wujin while we're with you as well, which is to do with, we've already talked with Hannah about the challenges of the material. What are some of the challenges that you've got with your material? What are some things that, you find tricky or intriguing, or that you've learned while working with this particular material?
I think what I find very intriguing with especially textile is because it kind of keeps the body's contour, and it kind of, whatever you wore for a long time, it has kind of like ghostly figures of you remaining behind. And it's very intriguing. It's like, it almost has a silhouette of you, and it kind of carries the identity of you. And yeah, if you think like that, how could you get rid of it, or how it's so intimate to you? Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
We've also got another question from Liz for you as well, Wujin, which is to do with what sewing machine do you use for embroidery? And while we're here as well, if we could just, if there's any hands that want to raise up as well, if we've got any questions from the audience as well, it'd be wonderful to get some from the audience as well. So what sort of sewing machine do you use? And
so throughout lockdown, when it was on domestic sewing machine from Jinju Lee. It was just an average sewing machine I had for like 5 years, and I didn't really use too much. But then because lockdown, I had to continue my work, and I got a free darning foot, which you can buy anywhere, and turn that into a freehand machine embroidery. Or at school, when it was open, there's Irish freehand embroidery machine from Zuki, which we all used in RCA. Yeah.
Fantastic. How about you, Hannah? Let's go back to that question about brands and collaborations. Do you get involved in all that? Have you called up Bombay Sapphire and said, can you please send me full bottles of Bombay Sapphire for me to work from?
It's interesting. So a lot of, so like you say, Bombay Sapphire, they've sent bottles. I work with, so a gentleman at the Society of Glass Technology has been incredibly good, and he sent insulin vials, and other people have sent, so pharmacists have sent COVID-19 vials, and people have been incredibly good with sending various types of glasses and different things like that. I don't know, I'm trying to, so a lot of people around the area know what work I'm doing, and so it's not uncommon in the morning to open a door and find 20 glass bottles from various sources, and I've got no idea where they've come from. The post lady slightly confused by this, but but the bottles come from all sorts of various places, and yeah.
Did we talk about your favorite glass sculpture at the V&A? Yeah, can I borrow the clip as well, please?
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, did we talk about your favorite sculpture at the V&A Museum?
So in the V&A Contemporary Glass Collection, which is awe-inspiring, there's Max Jacquard's Brick Man. So it's life size. It's probably a little over 6 foot tall. It's the most fabulous piece of work. Max Jacquard himself is an absolute delight. He's based down in Kent, and his work is fabulous. So top, middle, the clear one. So that figure's made from his recycled glass. I don't know if any of you have been to the V&A glass collection. It's a huge, extensive collection from glass artists all around the world. In fact, so David Reiki has a piece in there which was called A Captive Audience, which was a series of figures where one was turning backwards cheekily. And Colin Reed, again, an amazing cast, but they have such an extensive, amazing collection in there. It's just awe-inspiring, isn't it? You know more than I do.
And in terms of the narrative, though, let's talk about the narrative, because these are incredibly individual characters. I mean, what are some of the stories that come out of this? And then let's come back to that idea of the science of it as well. I mean, how difficult is it to create some of those designs that we see up here on screen? I mean, they look very, very colorful and bright, but what's the technical expertise behind it?
So a lot of it is led by the glass itself. So for example, on the top left, that's David Reiki's glass. So he uses Stourbridge crystal, and that's recycled Stourbridge crystal. So the firing schedule there, the temperatures that I take the kiln to is very different to, say, blowing glass, which is along the bottom. So bottom left, we have Louis Thompson and Bruce Marks, and they both work at London Glass Blowing, and they use blowing glass. And that doesn't particularly lend itself well to casting. So it's trying to work out that firing schedule. On the bottom right, we have James Devereux and Catherine Husky, who have this amazing glass blowing studio in Trowbridge. And one of the things about the world of glass, it's glass is such an unforgiving medium to work with. And anyone who works in glass, we all share the pleasures and the pain of working with glass. And it doesn't seem like a sensible thing to work with. So it's such an amazing community of people. Everyone's incredibly kind, incredibly supportive. And all of these here are no exception. But the glass itself, and it's interesting. So first of all, people will say, I'm really interested in having a figure in the collection. And then you see that they take time and think, well, what 3.1 kilograms of this glass I'm going to dispose of would I choose to represent me? And then so some people are thinking, for ages, well, should I be this color or a different color? And the glass is so unpredictable. So it's possible to sort of guess what the figures are going to look like, but there's always a big reveal at the end. So I don't know if you can click onto the next slide.
Of course.
So I don't know if anyone saw Blown Away. It's a Netflix series, and the winner of the series was Elliot Walker. So second from the top left, and he creates these amazing pieces of fruit. So it was tricky to try and cast and retain that exact shape. It was a challenge, but it was worth the challenge. But you can see their personalities coming out through the pieces. So this is just part of a big growing collection, all made from these glass artists' recycled glass.
I mean, it's their personality, but also the technical skill as well. And to kind of get the stripes between the white and the orange is actually a rather remarkably difficult thing to do. That's
it. Well, that's a delightful Catherine Schilling's piece. So it's the top of a roll-up. So she's made these amazing roll-ups, and it's the top of the pieces. So it's a challenge to do, but the effects are fantastic.
Mm. Have you hidden any in the audience? Is there a little glass figurine out in the audience?
I'm not going to say that there might be some along the road. I wouldn't dream of saying that. So if you see a 9 centimetre tall figure with a note on like Paddington Bear saying, please look after me with the origin of the glass, no idea where they come from. No idea at all.
I mean, the other thing I want to ask is just the difficulty of scale. And I'll come to you as well, Regina, about the question about scale. But like how much thinking is involved when you kind of go from small to a much larger piece that we've got on the table here?
So by the time they get to 41 centimeters tall, they require longer in the kiln. So you have to heat it up slower and cool it down slower. So that process, the initial process, takes a long time. And then the cold working begins. So being recycled glass, a lot of it does have to be done by hand, which just is a labor of love. So essentially you might have a sheet of glass with grit on it, and you work through various stages of grit. So to hold a 9.1 kilogram figure and move it in a figure of 8 for weeks and weeks, it's not the sensible thing to do. So it really is a labor of love. It's very, very time consuming, but I think the process of doing it just takes a very, very long time. I love doing it. I wouldn't change it for the world.
Brilliant. And what about you, Wujin, in terms of, I suppose you can get smaller socks and bigger socks, but what is involved in perhaps scaling up to a much larger, and would you be interested in working with much larger sort of installation pieces as well?
I think I've thought about different scales as well, and especially in terms of going big, it also kind of makes me think about if it does go big, and it does also mean more materials going into making the bigger piece, and is it by going bigger, is it much more actually effective in conveying the message, or is small enough to just say the same message? Like if this was a much bigger piece, like does it actually add advantage to it, or is it just bigger for the sake of being bigger and more eye-catching? And I think I sometimes think about that if it's actually necessary to go any bigger, but it also depends on the materials I actually find. There are actually bigger pieces I haven't shown in the presentation as well, which is using more like sweaters or bigger kind of garments. And inspired by the objects I found, it can scale up, but I think I always do try to think is it necessary to go bigger?
I suppose the natural question for something that relates to textiles is, we've talked about scale, and now I suppose the next thing we should talk about is speed. And it's to do with, for me, it's to do with the idea of fashion. You've got a sock here, and we can go out and buy a bulk set of socks, or we can buy high-end luxury socks as well. But what happens when we talk about speed and fashion? And I suppose here you're trying to encourage slow fashion, but the fashion cycle is incredibly fast, and you're trying to, what are you trying to do with the idea? You know, do you want, is it possible to have sustainable fashion as well, I suppose is the big question.
I think one of the quotes I saw is like the most sustainable fashion is already in your wardrobe. It's not buying new, and it's what you already own. But that is the most sustainable fashion choice. I think I kind of lost the question after that. What was the point again?
Well, I suppose I'd love to hear a commentary from you about just the idea of the fashion cycle that we're all on.
Yeah.
You know, we kind of go season to season, but it's sort of in a way compressing as well. You can see something on a catwalk, and then within a few hours, you'll probably have that same design in so many sort of stores on the high street. So what do you think about fashion when?
I think it's also, it makes me think about on one hand, is it necessary? Because I also saw a quote where it was like, you buy objects with the money you don't have, and you borrow and to impress people you don't like, which isn't always the truth, but it kind of makes you think. It's like, am I buying this because out of necessity, or like you really appreciate this thing, or is it because just chasing something? And I think it makes me think about that more. And yeah.
And would there be a possibility to say work with a fashion brand, for example, and then try to kind of look at how you can make more sustainable fashions? Like, what does sustainable fashion look like?
I think sustainable fashion would be really appreciating what you have and the choices you make, and making a lasting choice, that it's not just like, oh, this is for this season, and then next season, oh, it's something new. But it's, to be fashionable is to also have your own style, and to find that own style, and to really continue that. And it's not just chasing something that's fashionable. It's like who you are is fashionable, and it's finding that as well.
And I love the idea that there is this sense of, you've already mentioned the tradition that's in your work as well, and that idea that you are pulling a thread from this tradition as well. How do you think that you might sort of continue to evolve your work while also retaining that sense of tradition as well?
I think I've really started reconnecting with tradition part of COVID as well. I think it kind of gave me a time of like, what sort of message I want to carry, and how do I want to represent it, and who I am, and where I stand from where I am originally from and where I am now. And it kind of gave me a time to think about that. And I think there's a lot that I find in East Asian philosophy that has much relevance to the issues now. And I think it will be more actually, by focusing more on the philosophy, there's actually a lot more to say. Like, for instance, the idea of Taoism, and how like a value of an object, it's, for instance, like a cup, it's valuable because it's empty, and it's trying to focus on the very root of the purpose of an object. And I think there's a lot that I want to still research and learn and draw from there and bring it into my project.
If there's any questions, please do put your hand up, and we've got Boom Mic that will come around as well. I do have a question that's come in from online as well, and it's going to shift our discussion. I think it's actually quite a good time to shift as well. So we've got one of your objects here behind us, and we're talking about traditions. And Hannah would like to know about colors. And so I wanted to kind of get an idea with you in terms of your works. We've got a very restrained palette here, but up there's lots of different colors. Do the colors have a particular traditional meaning as well? There's reds, there's blues, there's yellows, white, black. Are there particular meanings and purpose to the color?
I think it was more inspired from the aesthetics of the images and the traditional art I found. And I think it's something actually I need to work on more, and to research and understand the significance of color. And in my previous project, I've focused on the color of red as well, and the symbolism it has, and the idea of like red symbolizing connection in East Asian culture. And I think I do really want to delve deeper into what each color signifies, and how it will be more relevant in my work in future.
Fantastic, thank you. And thank you to Hannah for the question at home, which is to go to, sorry, it's a question for Hannah, sorry. It's a question possibly from a Hannah, but it's from somebody online, so thank you. To Hannah, which is, do you have a favorite color to work with, a favorite color of glass? Personally, this person who's asked the question says, I love Bristol blue.
I love Bristol blue too. It's a beautiful, rich blue colour. To be honest, I like the glass that causes me the most problems. I like argumentative glass that is unconventional and doesn't do what I ask it to do. So I love the unconventional, but that Bristol blue, that rich blue cobalt colour is just gorgeous. And they're beautiful bottles, not mentioning any names, to work with. They're absolutely stunning. So no, I enjoy working with all the colours, but I particularly the ones that just that do misbehave.
I suppose in a way we're talking about the chemistry composition of it again, because certainly with textiles I know this a little bit better, but the different chemicals that are required to make a color sort of give, your light blues usually have a much softer feel to when you wear, say, the same shirt from the same company, the same style, but it's just because it's got two different colors, the chemicals used give it a different feel on your body. So I suppose that's the same with glass as well then.
Absolutely right, and some glass is hard to work with. So, like opaque white glass is a nightmare to work with. It's very problematic. It's very troublesome. Whereas other colours are a lot easier to work with. But in general, recycled glass it's quite a soft glass. So an example is television glass is very, very soft. It has high lead content. So to fire it is problematic, and then to go on to cold work it. So essentially, because I want to try and show that recycled glass can be taken to that museum quality polish. So if you get halfway through the cold working process, the process of polishing it, and you get a teeny scratch, you have to go right back to square one. So some colours will fire really, really easily, and then they're a nightmare to cold work. But yeah, I just enjoy the troublesome ones.
What about you, Ujin? Do you ever work with the colors themselves? Do you try and dye your own fabrics and textiles? Do you get involved in that part of the process?
I actually don't change the materials as they are found, and I think I did the same with the precious plastic project of not melting it and reforming it, because I think part of the work we do is actually try to show how it was found and where it comes from, and I think we don't want to change where it's originally from or how it originally looks, but add on to it and kind of transform it a bit so that it becomes interesting to look at and starts a conversation.
Exactly. It's having respect for the glass or the textiles as they were, and to try and change them as little as possible. So it continues that narrative.
Yeah, I think it sort of carries on that idea of sustainability as well. You work with the sort of the materials that you've got. But tell me about, in terms of starting with the Royal College of Art, you've just graduated, and a real graduation as well, I should add. That was very rare in this day and age, but you got to put on your gown and receive your certificate. So congratulations. But was this what you expected coming into the Royal College of Art as well, and what you've come out of with now as well?
Definitely not exactly what I thought it would. It kind of, the precious plastic project was started as my BA final project, and then so even before starting my BA, starting my higher education, I decided to do printed textiles and do kind of prints for fashion or accessory, and I kind of interned for fashion kind of brands, and then I realized this isn't really what I want to do, and I kind of started focusing on plastic, and then from there on I realized I just love talking about these narratives and showing these stories behind everyday objects, and I wanted to continue that, but I didn't know where to go and how to go, and I didn't know what to do. That's why I decided to do MA, and I kind of had a sense of, okay, I do want to focus it on material value, but I didn't know what exactly it was going to be, and this is what it came out.
Hannah has given us an idea of some of the feedback that Hannah has received already. What's been some of the feedback that you've received from your works? What have people said about it? There must have been a graduation show, surely, that people...
Yeah, we actually had a physical graduation show, so that was exciting. And I've just been very much fortunate of it also opens up another dialogue of where does textile lie in kind of higher art as well, and in fine art context, because I just started winning an award for a fine art textile prize, and the work sits in fine art and textile, and traditionally textile isn't usually thought of as a fine art work. It's more craft, it's more woman's work, and it would really, before it wouldn't really sit in a gallery context, but it's also trying to bring the textiles into a gallery context that I want to do. But yeah, it's been positive, and luckily I'm gonna be showing more at Dutch Design Week as well, which is exciting. And I think there is really a very big interest for kind of this storytelling and recycling and upcycling of material that everyone is very much interested in today, which is very exciting. Yeah.
What about you, Hannah? In terms of glass, working with glass, has that been considered a fine art material as well, or has that been sort of thought of as craft as well? Because we're talking about crafty science, but I think you're absolutely right. These are now considered to be, a level of fine art as well. And so I suppose that's the first question. Do you consider it to be? And then what are some of the considerations that you both may have when it comes to actually displaying it for the public as well?
I think the sort of the fine art and craft is it's debated at length. That many books have been written about it, and I think essentially my work sits between art and science. Really, I sit at the crossover between the two. So my work is essentially about materiality. It's always, people debate it at length, don't they? The art and craft relationship. But yeah, I'm bordering more on the science.
What are some of the considerations that you have when you put something on public display as well? What's the most recent sort of public display you've had, and what's some of the things you have to think about?
So I'm in various exhibitions at the minute. So I've just got into the Coburg Prize recently in Germany, which is fantastic. So it's a selected exhibition, and so that was my piece, the Shattered Past, made from recycled car windscreens. So for something like that, at the minute, it's actually physically getting the piece over to Germany, which is quite problematic because it's there's lots of problems with customs and all types of things like that. So I think in the end, fundamentally, I'm going to go on the train and take the piece over there myself, which would be an adventure. It's furthest I've gone in 2 years. So.
Yeah. Little handcuffed Lego man coming with you. Yeah.
I know. Some of the figures, though, have travelled further than I have, because I put them out for people to find and keep, and they've then gone on to people have put them elsewhere, and they've been found in Iceland, all over the world, basically. So they've travelled far further than I ever have in the last 2 years.
I think when she mentioned this when we met over Zoom, what really interested me here was also like materials actually today travel so much over the world, like from where its natural resources are found to where it's manufactured, where it's consumed, and then with the post-consumer as well, and going to waste. And I think the way you kind of put it out in the street and people to discover and to travel everywhere, I think that's just so interesting, and it kind of reminds me of that conversation as well, or it kind of links with that conversation. Yeah.
I think it's a really, really big consideration in terms of where different materials are sort of taken from, natural resources taken from, moved to, and then processed and then sent elsewhere. But I suppose we're coming to the final questions. I suppose it would be great to sort of get from you the idea of what would you like everyone to walk away with in terms of thinking about recycling and sustainability. I think perhaps telling everybody to go home and make their own glass figurine might be a little bit tricky. Probably don't try this at home. But what could everyone go home and think about, both from you, Hannah, and then also you, Woo-Jin?
So personally, I think glass is this amazing material. Aesthetically, it's fabulous. But we use it in so much in our everyday lives. It might be touchscreen phones. It could be jar of Marmite. It could be Vegemite. It could be marmalade. But how's that glass been made? And what's going to happen? Glass can be ultimately recycled. It's this amazing material. But to question where it's come from, how it was made, there are glass courses available. London Glass Blowing, not far. You could throw a tennis ball probably. It's not far away. They do glass blowing courses. Places, you can do glass casting, lamp working, stained glass windows. There's so much glass around you, but it's an amazing material, an amazing medium to work with. So my advice would be to try these things, have a go at glass blowing. It's an amazing thing to try. I'd go for it. Go for it, try glass.
I think I'll definitely try glass as well.
You'll love it.
I think what we very much want to convey is also the importance of craft, and today in the importance of craft education as well, and actually learning through making. And the process of making something really makes you appreciate its value, and you learn so much and you understand how much work goes into making anything. And I think that's very much what we want to convey it. Try fixing something, try reusing something, try imagining what else it could be, and just to start rethinking. That's probably
Exactly.
Sort of that sense of make, do, and mend, and then
Yeah.
you know you're very mindful of material in that way. Everyone, it has been absolutely wonderful to have you here with us, and everybody watching at home as well. Thank you so much for being part of this session and participating and asking all the wonderful questions. So can we please have another big round of applause for our two artists, so Hannah and Jinju. So thank you so much. Thank you. I've got some final housekeeping to do, which is to say that I spilled some water on my desk, so it's a slightly soggy invitation here. But thank you very much for attending. If you're here in person, please do click on the QR code. It'd be great to get your feedback on the survey that we've got. If you're at home, we're just about to drop the link right now, and you can click on the survey. It only takes about 5 minutes, and you'll be up for a £50 voucher as well, which is fantastic. But it really is just to tell us how much you love this discussion, how much you love the two artists. 5 stars is a good thing. And also, it just helps us make sure that we can carry on doing these events. It is the first Great Exhibition Road Festival back in person for a while, and we'd love to do this again. So it really just does help us make sure that each event will get better and better. So thank you so much. All right, final round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, well fun.